Chapter 19. I awoke to sunlight streaming through the window onto my face, though it took several minutes to convince myself to open my eyes. I squinted, raising a hand to my forehead. It was bright. Late morning already. Wait. Morning. Blinking rapidly, I sat straight up, chest tightening in alarm. It felt like it had only been a few minutes since I had closed my eyes. I did a quick scan of the room, and found it much the same as last night, save a dusty-looking quilt on the floor. My face burned with something between irritation and embarrassment as I realized that Grayson must have slept there. I turned my gaze away, as though doing so would alleviate the unpleasant churning in my stomach. Why hadn't he just woken me? Better yet, could he not have gone and slept in my room? My teeth clenched, but I tried to force myself to relax. Deep down, part of me was glad to have not spent the night alone. Perhaps this was the true reason behind my annoyance. I exhaled, eyes moving towards the small table by the window. Several items had been left upon it. A pitcher of water, and a glass, for which I rose out of bed to wash the sleep out of my mouth. Beside it was half a loaf of dark bread, and a few strips of dried meat. Finally, a torn scrap of parchment tucked under the plate, on which was a note written in infuriatingly impeccable handwriting.
Door is locked. We'll be back later.
I stared at the parchment, with a furrowed brow, for several long moments, fiddling with the glass of water in my hands. I couldn't really blame him for locking me in, though it wasn't as if I would have dared to venture out on my own anyway, following last night's episode. I absent-mindedly tore off a chunk of the bread, chewing as I glanced around the room a second time. Apart from the quilt, there were also a few articles of clothing on the floor. A shirt, a pair of trousers, a strip of leather that could be constructed as a belt. I found myself suddenly conjuring an image of him getting undressed in this room. I wondered if he'd done it while I was sleeping, just inches away from him. Drawing in a breath, I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, trying to will the flush from my cheeks. After forcing down some food and finishing the glass of water, I was left pondering what I was meant to do for the remainder of the day as I awaited Grayson's return. I paced the length of the room a few times, carefully stepping over the smattering of objects that was scattered about the floor. I was tempted to tidy up, but I wasn't sure Grayson would appreciate me touching his clothes. Instead, I pointlessly fussed with the sheets on the bed for another several minutes, sorely missing my books in the other room. Leafing through Ivanhoe for the 100th time sounded better than nothing. But I didn't have Ivanhoe, so I had to content myself with my own thoughts. The events of last night bled together in my mind, but I still clearly recalled how quickly Grayson had pulled his pistol on Nathaniel, with a look in his eyes that had frightened even me. Would he have done it? I had a hard time imagining Grayson shooting anyone, which, upon further consideration, was frankly ridiculous. As much as I liked to forget it, Grayson was a pirate, and he had surely killed men before. Shooting Nathaniel would have been nothing new to him. It was all too often that I had to remind myself of what Grayson was. Perhaps because every time I tried, another part of my brain countered by bringing to memory all the times he had been kind to me. The flush I had fought off earlier found its way back, as I remembered how quickly he'd softened last night, his gruff exterior melting away in an instant when I'd lost my composure. But he was a criminal, someone who had cheated, stolen, and almost certainly killed to get where he was now. Even so, Grayson had told me himself that he hadn't wanted this life. It was simply the hand he was dealt. I knew plenty of noble men, young soldiers, and tradesmen who had done things they shouldn't have with the women in our town. Any one of them could have gotten unlucky, the way Grayson had. So yes, Grayson was a pirate, but he was also more than that. And when I thought about the rest of the Libertas crew, like Finn and Captain McFarley, they were all more than that. Whether they were victims of circumstance or had simply been drawn to an outlaw's life. The word pirate wasn't enough to define them. Fundamentally, this was something my father would never understand. Time passed slowly as I waited, occasionally forcing myself to nibble on some of the food Grayson had left. But I hadn't much of an appetite. Although I had calmed down since the encounter with Nathaniel, my stomach still flipped each time he slithered into my thoughts. It was early evening by the time I heard a key in the lock, and I lifted my head from where I sat, soaking on the bed, heart quickening. Grayson entered, looking exhausted, a bag slung over his shoulder. His eyes flickered over to me for a moment, but he quickly averted his gaze in favor of closing and locking the door behind him. Then he shrugged off the bag, moving across the room to dump it on the table. I felt the color in my face deepening. The longer the silence lasted, grasping for words to break the tension. Luckily, he spoke first.
Are you all right?
I blinked, surprised by the question. He seemed hesitant to meet my gaze, shifting his weight backwards uncomfortably. I realized I was witnessing a rare and endearing, if not for the circumstances, moment of embarrassment from him. Yes, I said. Another brief silence before I added, "Thank you." He muttered an acknowledgement. I carefully drew my legs over one side of the bed, curling my hands around fistfuls of sheets, for lack of anything better to do with them. Grayson ran a hand through his hair.
I'm sure I don't need to explain to you why that can't happen again.
I
know what you were doing.
He interrupted, and finally met my gaze. His brows had folded downwards in disapproval.
I hear what goes on out there, too.
I blinked. Why don't you do anything about it? Grayson released a short, humorless laugh.
If I tried to rescue every whore in distress, I'd end up with another knife in my side. You ought to know better, too. I told you not to leave the room. Keep that up, and you'll be dragged off to someone's bed against your will.
I tried not to visibly flinch, but I must have failed, for his lips pressed together into a scowl. Though the immediate lowering of his eyes indicated that it was directed more at himself than at me.
Sorry, but it's true. You're lucky I heard what was going on. If you pull that again...
I won't, I snapped, cutting him off. I've more than learned my lesson, and I don't need an additional lecture. I rose. If you'll kindly unlock the door, I'd be happy to return to my own room so I can stop being a nuisance to you. He blew out an exhale, the corners of his mouth twisting in exasperation.
I didn't mean to make you angry.
What did you mean to do then? I don't see how this conversation serves any purpose other than for you to be insufferable.
Oh, I'm insufferable,
he repeated, with an abrupt, incredulous laugh. He took several steps towards me, forehead wrinkling as his brow furrowed even deeper.
Everly Williams, you drive me mad. If I'm insufferable, you only have yourself to blame for it.
My chest tightened, and without meaning to, I began to grind my teeth. If you hate me so much, why bother threatening other men with pistols on my behalf?
You know why.
But of course, I said, now completely unable to hold back. What was it you said when we met? Damaged goods are worthless goods. His eyebrows lifted, affronted, and a tinge of satisfaction seeped in at seeing that I'd caught him off guard. Because that's all I really am to you, right? Fine. So let me go back to my room, and I'll just sit and wait like a good little package until my father is ready to receive me. I stomped past him, but only travelled 1 or 2 steps before he grabbed hold of my arm, halting me in my tracks.
That isn't what I meant.
There was a shift in the tone of his voice that melted some of my anger away, and I turned to stare back at him with a mixture of vexation and confusion. He made a sound that was part sigh and part growl, and the grip he had on my arm loosened. My first instinct was to pull away, but his hard, grey eyes anchored me to the spot.
You want me to tell you the truth? I pulled my pistol because I saw his hands on you, and I couldn't stand it.
I blinked, but before I could pass the meaning of those words, he continued.
You drive me mad. Because not only do you refuse to leave my thoughts, but every time I'm in the same room as you, all I want is to tear off your clothes and make you gasp my name.
All advantage I'd had in the conversation had gone directly to him. It was my turn for speechlessness. His eyes bore into mine for several more moments before his hand opened, releasing me.
I'm attracted to you,
he said, matter of fact, as though he were telling me the color of the sky or the number of yards in a mile.
Too much for my own good. Or yours. That's the problem.
He broke his gaze to glare indiscriminately at the space to his left. A warmth was working its way up through my neck, and yet I was frozen in place, scarcely remembering to breathe.
It was stupid of me to let this happen. Nothing good can come of it. Soon you'll go back to your pretty little manor in England and marry some soldier or businessman, and we'll never see one another again.
It stung. Why did it sting? The words cut me to my core, and it didn't take long to realize that it was because they were true. If I ever made it home, Father would not waste much more time in marrying me off to his favorite officer. Likely some older man at whom I'd never so much as glanced. I faltered, mouth going dry, but I forced the words out. I don't want that.
Does it matter?
He asked bitterly.
What's the point in pretending, Everly? I'm no good for you. Trust me, you and I are much better off keeping our distance.
Better off. I took a step back, feeling my irritation reignite as my mouth pulled into a frown. What gives you the right to tell me how I'll be better off? I asked, words once again spilling out before I could think. Everyone seems to have an opinion on how I should live, but no one ever bothers to ask mine. My father, my suitors. And now you. Not once has anyone asked what I want. Grayson went quiet, expression evening out as he seemed to let my outburst wash over him. Then, cautiously, he took a step closer to me, putting himself mere inches away, disarming me with the sharpness of his stare.
Tell me then,
he said, voice softening.
What do you want, Everly?
I opened my mouth and found that I'd run out of steam as his discerning stare threw my train of thought off its tracks. Hearing him speak my name in that way made my legs weak. Every time those eyes took hold of mine, my brain turned to mush. What did I want? What do I want? Speech continued to fail me, and so instead of telling him, I closed the remaining distance between us and took it.